Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, January the 13th, 2025. Today, or perhaps tomorrow, there is a full moon in Cancer, and in this video that is what I want to talk about, and I'll be looking at what it means, and I'll also be considering where on earth it might have an impact, and I'll also consider some people who might be impacted by its influence. But before I look at this full moon, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, January the 13th. Usual reminder, if you like this video, then feel free to indicate that you do indeed like it by pressing the appropriate button, and if you're not subscribed, I would of course be very happy if you were to subscribe. Anyway, let's see what's happening today. So today, this is a chart, by the way, for today, set for noon New York time, and you can see that we have the moon in Cancer. Moon is at 20 degrees 56 Cancer at noon New York time, and so moon in Cancer. What can we say about moon in Cancer? Moon, all things being equal, works pretty well in Cancer. The moon is in its own sign. It's a very emotional sign. It's quite security orientated, and it may give us a chance to sort of ground things emotionally, all things being equal. But of course, we do have to consider what else the moon is doing. And of course, there is a full moon. The moon is moving towards an opposition with the sun. And of course, by definition, a sun-moon opposition is full. And this opposition, this full moon, takes place at 27 minutes past 10 in the evening, London time. So that means that it will take place, if you're in the Americas, the full moon will be this afternoon. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Asia, all of Asia, then the full moon will happen tomorrow. So this is why I talk about this full moon in terms of, either happening today or tomorrow. But still, we get a full moon feel to today's planetary picture. The moon is in Cancer. The sun is in Capricorn. Even if it's not exact, we can feel something going on. And, what the full moon is, it represents the peak of a lunar cycle. This lunar cycle, which started at the end of December, is now reaching its conclusion, not its conclusion, but it's kind of full impact. We can see what's happening. We can see what's going on. Things are starting to become clear at all levels. I suppose if you're in America, sort of the reality that Donald Trump really is going to be president, that might be one way of looking at it. Economically, people are very worried at the moment. There's problems in the bond market that everyone is talking about. People don't usually talk about the bond market in sort of in regular parlance, but the fact that bond yields are going up suggests that something is wrong. People are perhaps concerned about the future. People want to make sure that they're getting as high an interest rate as possible for their money if they're lending that money to the government. So there seems to be a concern about that. And I don't know if you're in the UK, the full moon might be the final sort of reality of the Labour government, remembering that Keir Starmer came to power with on just before a new moon, and so I suppose the full moon. In fact, Keir Starmer came to power with, I believe, a new moon in Cancer, if I remember rightly. And now we've got a full moon in Cancer. We're starting to see the full impact of it. But I think actually in my next video tomorrow, I'll be talking about UK and what's going on in the country, because it seems to be a bit grim. But I just have some observations that I wanted to make and share with you about the UK. So that's something perhaps for tomorrow, for Tuesday. And so the full moon is a time of truth. We can't hide anymore. And so reality is hitting. And I suppose on a personal level, we have to perhaps work out what we need to do to make ourselves feel secure, because you've got moon in Cancer, but the sun in Capricorn, and the two are somehow at odds with each other. We'd like things to be comfortable and easy, moon in Cancer, but the sun in Capricorn is reminding us of what things are really like, maybe on at least on a material level. So really, this full moon dominates the day, even if it's not exact until tomorrow. And there are other aspects going on which perhaps feed into the full moon. I mean, look at Uranus. Uranus is at 2323 Taurus. In other words, the sun is trine Uranus and the moon is sextile Uranus. So this full moon is further described by Uranus, and I suppose you see Uranus, sun trine Uranus, moon sextile Uranus as being nice, easy aspects. But it may just be that we've got a moon-Uranus contact. There could be something about today where we see the unexpected, where we feel the unexpected, and that might be a little bit disturbing. On the other hand, we perhaps have a chance to stir things up ourselves. So perhaps if we're not comfortable with things, we can maybe make things happen. Now, and another aspect we have is Mars semi-square Jupiter. Now, this Mars semi-square Jupiter, London time, is actually not exact until tomorrow, Tuesday. But I think we're still feeling it. And I think we've been feeling it for a few days now. I think the reason why we're feeling it over a prolonged period of time is because Mars and Jupiter are both going quite slowly. So the aspect is in orb for a prolonged period of time. And I mean, I've already described Mars square Jupiter, but there may be a sense in which we are just taking things a little bit too far. Mars Jupiter is a high energy pairing, so we might feel we've got a lot of energy, but where do we use this energy? Where do we put this energy? And I think that there's a possibility that we might put this energy in the wrong place. So do be careful if you feel highly energized about what exactly you're going to be doing with all this energy that is apparently at your disposal, although when you actually get to use it, there could be a few problems. So that's the broad geocentric picture. And as far as Sydney, Australia is concerned, just remember the moon is at 20 degrees Cancer from a perspective of New York at noon, Sydney, Australia at noon. As a representative of Australasia and Eastern Asia, it's not necessarily about Sydney in particular. We have the moon at 11 degrees Cancer. So you can see that in Sydney, Australia, the moon is much earlier in the sign, and the big aspect is perhaps moon trine Venus, moon trine Saturn. So possibly today is going to be a little less turbulent in Eastern Asia and Australasia than it is in Europe and the Americas. That full moon is just a little bit further away, but still the moon is still in Cancer, the sun is still in Capricorn, so there is still a full moon feel to the day. So that's something that we should be aware of. And one thing about this full moon is that I suppose from a Vedic perspective, I mean it's always a good idea to look at things from a Vedic perspective. This full moon, I believe, would not be in Cancer. It would be in, I think, the last degree of Gemini. So there might be a sort of a slight sort of difference there if you want to look at things from a Vedic perspective. But by and large, I don't tend to look at the positions of the planets from a Vedic perspective on a regular basis. I mean, I do occasionally look at Vedic charts, but not today. I'm not going to look at this full moon from a Vedic view. I think there are other people on the internet that do that. And then we have the heliocentric picture. Now, of course, when we look at the heliocentric picture, the moon disappears, and so does the ascendant. And the reason the moon and the ascendant disappear, well, is because it's more general. And from the sun's perspective, the Earth's moon is kind of irrelevant. It's the same place as it's where the sun is as well, where the moon is. Sorry, get that straight. The Earth and its moon, from the sun's perspective, are in pretty much the same place. So you can't really distinguish between the two. So here is the heliocentric chart. So heliocentrically, there's the Earth-Mars conjunction. Now, that Earth-Mars conjunction is getting closer. I mean, I've been tracking this Earth-Mars conjunction over the last week and more. And so the Earth is where we are. It is the Earth. It's important. And it's moving to a conjunction of Mars. It's less than 2 degrees apart. I mean, it's just over a degree apart, the Mars-Earth conjunction. So, we can feel some of that tension. And, this full moon is actually quite close to Mars, as I'll be discussing later in this video. And so we now get Earth conjunct Mars. And so in terms of what's happening down here on planet Earth, it just feels that the tension levels are really starting to rise, and the Earth is not just conjunct Mars, it's also sextile Uranus. So that sextile Uranus is reflecting, that Earth sextile Uranus is reflecting what we already see in the geocentric chart, which is Sun trine Uranus. So if you've got Sun trine Uranus, you've got Earth sextile Uranus. I mean, that makes sense because the Earth is in Cancer, so it's kind of closer to Uranus, so it's a sextile rather than trine. So there is a feeling that things are beginning to stir up, and also we have a sextile between Mercury and Pluto. Mercury and Pluto is about perhaps how we're trying to influence the people around us, or perhaps how the people around us are trying to influence us. The issue of influence is important, and how we can perhaps make people change their minds, or get people to understand our points of view. And as it's a heliocentric chart, it's the world in which we live. Lots of people are trying to have an influence, trying to have an impact, trying to make people do things their way, perhaps using the message, the right message, trying to get people to believe things. So, that might be how the Mercury sextile Pluto works, but maybe we can harness that Mercury sextile Pluto power for ourselves. So if we want to try to be influential, if we've got a particular message that we want to push, then now might be a good time to do it. So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric picture. I think some of the heliocentric chart we already can see from the geocentric chart, in particular the Earth conjunct Mars, Earth sextile Uranus. In fact, Mars is moving to a sextile of Uranus, so there is something going on, and by tomorrow the Earth will be even closer to Mars, and Mars will be even closer to Uranus. So that connection between Earth, Mars, and Uranus, will be closer on Tuesday, but I'll discuss that tomorrow. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, January the 13th, 2025. Aries. Today, Aries, or perhaps tomorrow, there is a full moon, and I think that you can feel it. I think it is perhaps going to be important for the average Aries, and this full moon is perhaps challenging. I think Aries left to your own devices, you might feel that you want to do things your own way, at your own pace, and you don't necessarily want to be disturbed or bothered. I mean, I know that's not typical Aries behavior, but with the moon in Cancer, I think that the sensitive side to your personality is perhaps coming out, and if people leave you alone, you'll leave them alone. Though the moon is full today, tomorrow, moon making an opposition to the sun, and that does represent a challenge. It represents the challenge of the world around you. Things you have to attend to, things you are forced to pay attention to. And this full moon is actually quite close to Mars. So moon is moving towards a conjunction of Mars. Okay, that moon conjunct Mars is not exact until tomorrow, but it's still getting there. And I think that this full moon does have a Mars feel to it. And of course, Mars is your ruler. So you do feel that you have to do something, and it's not just the fact because there's a full moon. It's also the fact that Mars, which is your ruler, is moving towards a 45-degree aspect with Jupiter. And so that Mars-Jupiter contact is highly energized. It really makes you want to do things. You can't just stay still in one place. I mean, part of you actually would, of course, like to stay still in one place. That would be better. That would be best. But you just feel you can't, because there's just something that has to be done. So Aries, there could be a lot of nervous energy flying around as far as you're concerned. And this nervous energy, I think, would be more intense if you made a special effort to do nothing, because you're always knowing, but you feel that you should be somewhere else. And so the question is, how do you manage it? I mean, I suppose with this full moon, you could say, well, it's square Chiron, just about. I mean, it's not an exact square Chiron. I mean, Chiron is at 19 degrees 8 Aries, but 19 Aries. I suppose Chiron is in your sign, and with this full moon squaring Chiron within 5-degree orb, it might be a case of you just feeling that the only resolution to the matter is to do things differently. You certainly can't do things other people's way. I mean, you might like to, but you can't. And by being an individual as early as possible, you'll I think, be making things easier for yourself. In fact, the moon does make a square to Chiron today. So that moon square Chiron, yeah, perhaps you can demonstrate that you are an individual, and that may be something you have to do. I mean, not everyone is necessarily going to like what you do, like what you present, but in terms of your own comfort, you can't just stand by and do nothing. I think it's important that you're able to sort of tune into your own power, and that is something you can do if you want to. And if you look at Mars, Mars is actually, which is your ruler, is of course quite interestingly placed, because Mars just had an opposition to Pluto. I mean, that Mars-Pluto opposition started just before the presidential election at the beginning of November. So we had Mars opposition Pluto. And now the Sun is moving towards an opposition of Pluto. So in terms of degrees, Mars is halfway between an opposition of the Sun and an opposition of Pluto. And it's actually exactly halfway there at the moment. And this opposition is actually taking place not so much because of Mars's movement, because of the Sun's movement. The Sun is moving faster, obviously, from Mars and Pluto, so it's coming in and forming this symmetry. You can see it on a chart. I mean, it's very clear. There's Mars opposition to Sun and Pluto. I mean, that makes it very clear. In fact, if you want, I can demonstrate this on a 90-degree dial, just to show you what I mean. So on a 90-degree dial, you can see that that there's Mars and there's Sun and there's Pluto, and so that's actually that's a 90-degree dial. So you can see that Mars is between the Sun and Pluto. So that aspect, or that midpoint configuration, I think is in a sense very energizing, and it really makes you feel that you have to create change, that you're not comfortable with the way things are, and I think that you will just want to tune into all the energy you've got and just really throw it out and make something happen. And, that might be a little bit scary, but if you're not happy with the way things are, Aries, with that Mars opposition to Sun, Pluto midpoint, I really do think that you're in a position to make things happen, and your power is not going to be immediately obvious. It will be somewhat hidden, and people may sort of not notice it, and then all of a sudden you can make things happen. So, don't be satisfied with the status quo. If you want to change things, you can. I mean, don't just change things for the sake of it, but it's perhaps all about how you use your power, and I suppose you want to use your power responsibly, but what you also don't want to do is to hold yourself back, because you really have got something to offer. Taurus, the moon continues moving through Cancer, and I think it does seem, Taurus, that you have quite a lot to say, quite a lot to think about, and perhaps you also have to ask a few questions. It may be, Taurus, that there have been certain things in your life which you have just regarded as being absolutely obvious. It was clear. You felt that you really understood the truth of the matter. And what's happening now is there may be a few questions. Moon opposition Sun. The Sun, Moon opposition Sun is about perhaps the truth being revealed, seeing things for how they really are. And when you do see things for how they really are, you get a different picture. And you see this picture and you realize that maybe you've got some things wrong in the past, or maybe other people have got some things wrong. You've made some assumptions, and those assumptions are not necessarily correct. And so don't be surprised if you have a change of mind. And if you have a change of mind, it's absolutely fine. And I mean, it's progress. And Taurans can find it quite difficult to change their minds. It is a fixed sign, Taurus. You keep going in the same direction, you keep believing the same things, but then things change. So be open-minded. Consider the possibility, perhaps, that you have got something wrong in the past, or that other people have got something wrong in the past, and that might have an impact on some of your more fundamental beliefs. And at the same time, you are ready to be assertive. I think that you do feel that it's important that people know how you feel. And I suppose a lot of that assertion may take place through what you say. You've certainly got a lot of things to say, and also in terms of other people, I mean, I think that at the moment you are relatively sociable. I mean, the moon is in Cancer. It has been making trine aspects to Pisces planets. I mean, it's it's actually making a sextile to Uranus at the moment, and in fact the Sun is making a trine to Uranus. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the sociability is definitely there, but Venus is of course your ruler. Venus is in Pisces. Venus is starting to move towards a conjunction of Saturn, and with that conjunction to Saturn, you're starting to become aware of certain limitations, that things perhaps have limits to how far they can go, and more importantly, you're becoming aware of the limitations of other people. I mean, perhaps you're aware that if you spend perhaps too much time with another person, you might feel that you're hemmed in by them. And if you want to avoid that kind of situation, then probably now is the time to make the move. Don't leave it too late. I mean, it's like if you've got an object coming your way, and when the object is far away, it doesn't take much to shift that object off course. I suppose one thinks about an asteroid coming the Earth's way, and I suppose there are people, scientists are saying, well, maybe if you can get that asteroid to change its course at an early stage, it will miss the Earth. And it's a similar situation here. When you have Venus moving towards a conjunction of Saturn, it may be you're dealing with a situation where you can start to see that someone or a group of people could be a real pain very soon. And it's not inevitable, because Venus is still, around 5 degrees off that conjunction of Saturn. So now might be just a time to sort of head the other way, or start to put yourself in a situation where you don't have to deal with these sort of irritating individuals who seem to be certainly on the horizon. But yeah, they're not there yet. We also have a trine aspect between the Sun and Uranus. And I think that this Sun trine Uranus is quite invigorating. It's quite exciting. And Uranus is in your sign. And Uranus is perhaps you as the free thinker. And I've just talked about the Sun and the Moon, the full moon, perhaps realizing that you've got a few things wrong, or perhaps other people have got a few things wrong. And Uranus trine the Sun perhaps allows you to look at things from a different perspective and to be original. And maybe the full moon will encourage you to be original. You see things for how they really are. Maybe other people don't see it, but you see it. It's quite obvious to you. It's right in front of you. And because it's right in front of you, you're in a position where you really feel that you can take action, and you certainly don't have to be satisfied with the way things were in the past. You can, perhaps in your own small way, be a little bit of a revolutionary. Gemini, we do have continued action in Pisces. Pisces is now, from your perspective, quite a busy sign. We've got Venus, Saturn, Neptune, the North Node in Pisces, and I think that the Pisces, from your viewpoint, perhaps represents the kind of progress you can make and the kind of initiatives you can take. And the North Node is now in Pisces, so it's not a time to be leaving things to other people, or just to be looking the other way, just assuming society is going to sort it all out. It is a time for you to take a stand, and for you to be focusing on, what is the next step. And so over the next 18 months, Gemini, I think that it's going to be important that you are not complacent. So even if things start going well for you, then don't rest on your laurels. Be ready to step things up to the next stage, and then the next stage, and the next stage. So keep developing, keep moving, I'm not saying it's always going to be easy. I mean, the North Node currently is conjunct Neptune. You may feel a certain sense that you don't know where you're going. And it's confusing. What is the next step? Can you really work it out? Yeah, it's a situation where it's difficult to work it out, but you have to keep trying. And you have to be very focused and very disciplined. And I think that this is something you actually can do, because at the moment, for example, Venus is making a conjunction to Saturn. And with Venus starting to make a conjunction to Saturn, okay, this conjunction won't be exact until, the end of the week. But with this Venus conjunct Saturn, you can be disciplined and you can put yourself in a situation where you're not being overwhelmed by human feeling. You can be a little bit tough, but at the same time you can understand the emotional environment, and that might help you in terms of how you chart your way forward, because that's always what you should be thinking about. Now, Gemini, there is a full moon. Okay, full moon might be today, might be tomorrow, but it's there. It's going to affect all of us in different ways, and the full moon could be a revelation. Gemini, full moons are often revelations because we see the truth. We see the truth for what it really is, and the moon is in Cancer. Sort of Gemini interruption. Let's turn the phone off. So the moon is in Cancer, and that does mean that there might be a certain financial dimension to the full moon. And perhaps the full moon is a time where you start to understand the truth about money, the truth perhaps about how much money you have or how much money you need. Or it could just be something about material possessions. And to begin with, there might be a sense of surprise. And as a result of what you notice, you decide to take action. Now, I'm not saying that you notice that there's a financial problem or you haven't got enough money. It might be something else. It might be just something you notice about money that you hadn't realized before. So in terms of what you should be doing with this full moon is that you should be open and honest and realistic, and don't hide from the truth. So if there are ways of understanding your money better, perhaps just by looking at any bank accounts you have, just adding things up, playing around with a spreadsheet, or that kind of thing, there's going to be a sense of awareness. I mean, it could be that you realize you got more money than you expected. It's quite possible. Maybe you had been a bit concerned about money, and you do your calculations and you actually realize that everything's fine. So that is a possibility. And the full moon at the same time is perhaps challenging you to bring things down to earth. Perhaps you had regarded money as being just too complicated, perhaps connected with other people and what other people owe to you, or kind of financial arrangements you have with other people. And the full moon can really bring things out into the open. And Gemini, be focused, and there could be some surprises, but I don't think that these surprises need to be a bad thing. In fact, it might be a pleasant surprise. I mean, who knows? I suppose, as always, it depends on your situation. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, it's the case that some of the people around you today, tomorrow, may be quite active. They may want things to happen. They may be quite pushy. They may actually feel as if they're somewhat frustrated, as if they've got so much energy that they don't know what to do with it. And so if you do spend a long time with other people, particularly if you spend time with another person quite intensely, you might realize that they've perhaps got more energy than you have, and they want things to happen. They want to do things, and you might have your doubts. So I think in that sense, relationships should be treated with a little bit of caution, because it just might be that you and someone else just aren't seeing things in the same way, and there might be differing priorities, but I don't think it's particularly problematic. You just have to perhaps be patient and just make sure that your own priorities are looked after. And I think you do have priorities at the moment. And I think that in a broad sense, Gemini, what you should be trying to do today is really just make sense of things, and also make sense of what you need to do to get to where you want to go. Cancer, we have a full moon. Okay, this full moon might be today, might be tomorrow, but I think you're very much feeling the fact that there is a full moon. And of course, what that means is that the moon is in Cancer, your sign, and the sun is in Capricorn, your opposite sign. And so this is the full moon across the main axis of your chart. Every year there will be this Cancer full moon. Sometimes there'll be two Cancer full moons. If you have one Cancer full moon right at the beginning of Cancer, that means you can get a second one right at the end. But usually there's just going to be one Cancer full moon a year, and this is a time to reflect and also to just consider who has the power, how much control you have, and then you might want to make some adjustments. And in terms of relationships, the Cancer full moon gives you valuable insights in terms of what you can do and what the limitations on your freedom actually are. So Cancer, really do consider what impact other people are having on you. Are they having a favourable impact, or are they undermining you? And full moons are about the truth. And if you see that something isn't working, then this might be a time when you can take appropriate measures. And, the moon, having made that full moon, when it's having made the opposition to the sun, moves on to making a conjunction to Mars. Now, that conjunction to Mars is more about tomorrow than today, but I think you're still still feeling it a little bit, and Moon conjunct Mars can actually be quite assertive. Remember, that Moon-Mars conjunction is taking place in your sign, and so perhaps in the build-up to that Moon conjunct Mars, you're going to feel that you really want to assert yourself, and you want to make it clear that you have your opinions, you have your plans, and you're not prepared to compromise. Moon, additionally, makes a square to Chiron. So just before the full moon, there is this Moon square Chiron. And I think the Moon square Chiron reminds you of your fundamental individuality. And it's about the fact that you have your own plans, your own ideas, your own way of viewing the world. It's actually quite original, and it's quite disruptive. And, one sort of stereotype of Cancer that one can have is that Cancers like to maintain the status quo. Cancers like to be secure. Cancers don't want to shake things up. Of course, that is completely untrue. Elon Musk is a Cancer. Look at Elon Musk. He's trying to do all sorts of things, in fact, I had a video 2 videos ago. I looked at Julius Caesar and I looked at Elon Musk, and so Alexander the Great was a Cancer. So Cancerians are really quite capable of being revolutionaries and stirring things up, and even destroying other people's comfort, perhaps being concerned that other people are getting too comfortable. And yeah, you want to stir things up, and that might be how the Moon square Chiron can function. You not being happy with the way things are going. you're feeling people and just maybe dragging their feet and not listening to you, not paying attention to you, and then you just have to do something dramatic, and then you can be the maverick. But you're a maverick with a human heart, with a humanity, because I think that fundamentally you feel that people are behaving in such a way that they are maybe undermining society or making themselves or other people miserable, and ultimately you want people to be happy, and it may be that people have to change what they're doing in order to be happy. And you have a good idea about what it means to be happy. I mean, I know that happiness is very subjective. We all have ideas about what happiness is, but Cancer, I think you have your own ideas, and you know that some people are unhappy, and you perhaps feel that things have to be stirred up in order for people to be able to, I don't know, be content, not be oppressed. I suppose Karen is about wounds, healing wounds, but you can't just accept the status quo, because as far as you're concerned at the moment, the status quo isn't going anywhere. Leo, we have a full moon today. I mean, the full moon must inevitably affect Leos, simply because full moons involve the sun. Full moon is moon opposition sun, and so the moon opposition sun, when there is a full moon, it can represent some kind of challenge, and I suppose the task is to sort of work out where that challenge comes from. And I think, Leo, that you maybe would like things to be done in a particular way, and you thought you'd got it all planned out, and you have these plans, and something is challenging these plans. Something is challenging them that you weren't necessarily expecting, and it might be a challenge from yourself, from maybe the depths of your unconscious, and your unconscious is telling you that something is not right, and you kind of want to ignore your unconscious, but you know fundamentally you have to accept the reality of something. And so full moons are about tuning into the reality of a situation and then taking the appropriate action. And this full moon is linked up with Uranus. So one of the main aspects today is Sun trine Uranus. So Sun trine Uranus is again about you trying to sort things out, trying to create some order around you, Sun in Capricorn, and then trine Uranus, something undermines it, something stirs it all up. And this is not a bad thing. You perhaps have a renewed sense of who you are, where you're supposed to be going, and you may feel that some kind of radical change is required. And this concept of radical change has been brewing for some time, and with Sun trine Uranus, you're now in a position where you feel that something does need to be overturned. Part of you doesn't want it to be overturned, because it's just so much easier if you just continue with things in the same old way. But you know that something has happened, and so now is the time to have another look at what you are doing, and also do tune into your own authority. I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily a time where you immediately feel that you are a great authority figure. You might feel that it's not quite the right time, or the circumstances aren't right, but you can actually be taken seriously, and you can be noticed, and your particular views do matter. people will listen. And if you explain to people how things should be run, how you'd like things to be run, and you're able to take into account the changes happening all around you, if you can sort of internalize the change, or internalize perhaps the rapid transformation that many of us are having to deal with, if you can internalize all of this, then I think, Leo, you can actually come over in really a very powerful way. And yes, you will be helped by the fact that this aspect, the Sun trine Uranus, is allowing you to take things further, move things on to the next stage. Though in terms of relationships and other people, the people you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, don't assume that nothing is going on. Don't assume that people aren't having quite intense thoughts. You're not the only person having powerful feelings, having your own inner transformations and so forth. Other people have their own dramas, and they are in the process of changing. And we do have a conjunction forming between Venus and Saturn, and this Venus-Saturn conjunction is exact over the weekend. And I think if you're talking about Venus, you're talking about relationships and also thoughts about relationships, and people thinking about which relationship is right for them. And you might actually be the subject of another person's thoughts in a good or a bad sense, or in a positive or a negative sense. So don't assume that nothing is going on in other people's minds, in other people's hearts. Things are happening, and I think, Leo, a little bit of sensitivity might be in order. With all these planets in Pisces, Venus, Saturn, Neptune in Pisces, you have the opportunity to think and feel what's going on, to sort of try to tune into other people's sensitivities. And if you can pick this up, it's not that you necessarily have to be concerned about it right now, but in a way it might be like a note for the near future. And perhaps you can take note of what people are doing, not just what they're saying, but also what they're not saying. You can look at their body language, you can look at their behavior. Has their behavior changed in any way? And that might give you some important clues about what's going to happen next. So in terms of relationships, I would have said, Leo, over the next few days, try to be as perceptive as possible. Virgo, we do live in a somewhat uncertain world, and people don't know what's going to happen next. They might have their doubts about the future, and they just can't make sense of things. And under those circumstances, the kind of person they want to have around is perhaps someone like you. I think, Virgo, at the moment, you have a sense of what is going on. If you really think about it, you understand the inner dynamics, and I think you're going to be quite good at explaining things in simple terms. And when people listen to you, they'll really appreciate your efforts, the fact that you are trying to make sense of things. Now, you yourself might not feel that you're an expert. You might not even feel that you've got anything useful to say, but I think you'd be mistaken. You are noticing things. You're noticing things that other people can't see, and you're in a great position to really help people, make sense of it all on all levels. People might have issues in their personal lives. They can't make sense of it. They might have issues in terms of understanding what's happening in the world. They can't make sense of it. But, you can make sense of it. And even by just telling someone, this is a complicated situation, and even by saying that you're not an expert, it is a complicated situation, it's difficult to understand, even by saying something like that, you are helping another person make sense of things. And this does mean, Virgo, that you can make sense of things for yourself. And so it's not a time, Virgo, where you should feel that you have to be confused, that you don't know what's going to happen next. You can see it all. You can see it all, at least to your own satisfaction. And I would have said, in general, at the moment, you're quite good at understanding political processes. I mean, political processes can happen at this level of sort of nation states, but they can also happen in terms of families, companies, organizations. So you are, I think, as I've just said, a useful person to have around. And at the same time, Virgo, you're quite sympathetic, or at least you can be sympathetic if you just make a little bit of an effort to understand what's bothering people. And the North Node, of course, is now moving into Pisces, which is your opposite sign. And that is a little bit of a challenge, because North Node in Pisces means that you've got to perhaps accept other people's insecurities, other people's particular way of seeing the world. You accept it, you understand it, you sympathize with it. And having done that, having demonstrated that understanding and that sympathy, you can start to move on to the next stage and take control of things. And that's when you can maybe, I won't say give orders, but you can certainly make suggestions. And I think that in most cases, people are actually going to listen to your suggestions, and they're going to be interested in what you have to say. In fact, perhaps relieved by what you have to say. And one aspect we have today is a trine aspect between the Sun and Uranus. The Sun is in Capricorn, Uranus is in Taurus. So the trine is taking place in earth signs. This trine has an impact on Virgo, which is also an earth sign. And so Sun trine Uranus allows you to create change, to create a change of focus, and also to be quite original. Now, this doesn't necessarily need other people. It can be something you're doing on your own. You can do something which is really very original. And it may be that it's so original that, to begin with, it doesn't need to be discussed. Maybe it shouldn't be discussed, because you wouldn't get the right feedback. People might not understand what you're doing. So perhaps to begin with, you need to do things on your own, not everything on your own, because as I've already said, other people do matter, but there are certain things that are important to you that you really need to work through in your own way. And if you were to be too open about your ideas, there might be an extreme reaction in certain quarters. So, I have been talking about how you can have an impact on other people, how you can have quite a favorable impact on other people. But your job is not to create drama for the sake of drama, and you need to use your sensitivity to understand that some people might overreact. An overreaction is a real possibility, because one of the aspects we've got today is Mars semi-square Jupiter. So this Mars semi-square Jupiter has been a feature, since the weekend. Mars and Jupiter have been moving together. Tomorrow, moving closer to this 45-degree aspect. This aspect is exact tomorrow. So with this exact 45-degree Jupiter, Mars Jupiter semi-square, there's just this possibility that someone overreacts, and you have to be sensitive to this. I think that if you do listen to your feelings, I think you're going to know where this overreaction is going to come from. So, don't just say whatever's on your mind. And while it's true that you can really help certain people out, you can help them out by being reassuring. But if you're too radical, too extreme, and you are too quick to apply your own individual solutions to everyday problems, you might find that there is a negative response, and that's just something you've got to be aware of. So, in general, other people do matter today, but it's not all about today. Is not all about other people. There is a place for your own individuality, and you don't have to shout about your individuality, particularly as some people might not be able to handle it. Libra, there is a full moon today, and I think that this full moon does have an influence on you. The moon is in Cancer, and Cancer is a sign in a Libran horoscope which is about ambition. And I think, Libra, you're starting to realize that there are things that you really want to do, and you want to get going on it as quickly as possible. And I think there is a certain impatience there, and therefore you want to be as obstacle-free as possible. But the question is, can you be obstacle-free with a full moon? The full moon reminds you of everything that is holding you back. It might be that you have concerns about your family, your security, your domestic situation. You might have to spend time on another person's worries. So there is a lot of stuff to think about. But that moon in Cancer is asking you to really make an impact and to move forward. And the moon is actually making a conjunction to Mars. Now, that conjunction to Mars is exact tomorrow, but I think that you are feeling it, and you feel that you really need to impose yourself and make sure that you are taken seriously. So, Libra, you have to be aware of your responsibilities, but you mustn't be tied down by these responsibilities. And fundamentally, Libra, at the moment you are really very dynamic, perhaps more dynamic than you realize. And once you get going on things, once you decide that there's something you really want, then I'm not sure what can stop you. And the full moon, you can look at it in different ways. I mean, one way of looking at the full moon is to say that the full moon is emphasizing everything holding you back, all the reasons why you can't be successful. But another way of looking at the full moon is that it shows you what you want to do. You see what you want to do. It's as clear as day, almost as clear as day. It is the light of the moon, not the light of the sun, but it's almost as clear as day. But also you can see what is preventing you from achieving your ambitions. And it may be, Libra, that in the past you hadn't fully understood this. You were maybe banging your head against a brick wall. Why weren't things happening? And you tried to answer this question, but you couldn't. But with the full moon, it can be obvious. If you open your eyes, you can see, if you like, the chains. The chains had not been obvious. The chains had been invisible. But the chains and the shackles holding you back, now you can see them. You can see what the chains are made of. You can see who is holding the chains, and you can see the weakness of the chains. So in that sense, Libra, I would have said that it could be a very liberating experience, this full moon. Of course, just because you become aware of a problem and aware of the solution to the problem doesn't mean that you take action. So in a way, it's up to you in terms of how you respond to the revelations of this full moon. Now, another aspect that I should possibly comment on is the conjunction between Venus and Saturn. The end of a week, Venus makes a conjunction to Saturn. So this conjunction between Venus and Saturn is now 5 degrees apart. And you're feeling it, and it's going to get stronger. And so you have to work out, what is it? It may be that Saturn represents some kind of obstacle that's coming up, and it's not there yet. And you have some kind of warning. And so because you have this warning, that gives you an opportunity to act and to prepare. So that's certainly a way of looking at Saturn. Venus conjunct Saturn might also be a feeling that you're not fully organized. So you've got big ambitions, at least I hope you've got big ambitions, but then what is preventing you from achieving these ambitions? I mean, Venus is in Pisces, it's in its exaltation, so that's good from a Libra perspective. Venus is in a part of a chart which is about organization and preparation, and then it's moving towards a conjunction of Saturn. So it just may be that you're becoming aware with this Venus moving to a conjunction of Saturn of all the things you need to do, all the things you need to get together in order to achieve what you need to achieve. And again, with the full moon, it's all obvious, it's all clear, it's all right in front of you. And you don't want to spoil things by not paying attention and not being aware of what is needed. You also don't want things to be spoilt by other people, and I've suggested that home and family could be an issue. I think you have to kind of understand their needs but not give them everything. And then there is a possibility that particular individuals could spoil things if you pay them too much attention. And that's because there is a semi-square aspect between Mars and Jupiter. Mars may reflect another person, possibly another person who has a certain amount of authority. If you're working or you're in business, it could be someone at work or someone who you do business with who is quite opinionated, really believes in themselves, but might be in a temporarily weakened state, which means they're trying all the harder to come over strongly. And this Mars is semi-square Jupiter. So Mars semi-square Jupiter, this may represent a person who is not as strong as they think they are, and is perhaps slightly frustrated, but feels they really need to assert themselves as much as possible. So if you are aware of this kind of person, I could say that you should accommodate them, or you should try to understand them, but maybe you need to either confront them or just avoid them. So watch out for that Mars semi-squared Jupiter, and just consider that some people, through their excessive action and their excessive behavior, could just make things difficult for you. But I do think it's a situation that you can deal with or perhaps avoid. Scorpio. So I was just talking to Libra, and I was just talking to Libra about a semi-square aspect between Mars and Jupiter. And this Mars semi-square Jupiter, it's exact tomorrow, I think. It could be exact late today, early tomorrow, depending on your time zone. But this Mars semi-square Jupiter could have an impact on you, and it could perhaps represent you. Mars is you. Mars semi-square Jupiter could represent you being overactive, being perhaps too keen to make things happen, having too much energy for your own good. So, Scorpio, it's very important that you don't overdo it. You might feel that you have to sort of overreact. Maybe you feel there's some threat, something irritates you, you have to respond, or you just feel you've got so much going on in your mind that you've just got to do something. So I would really suggest that you ask yourself what you're trying to achieve. Now, it may well be with this Mars semi-square Jupiter that you have a lot of energy and you can completely focus it on the right areas and you can get a huge amount done. So if you have that kind of focus, that's great. But if you are unfocused and there are sort of several different things that you're worrying about, then this Mars semi-square Jupiter could be quite undermining. It could even be a bit dangerous. I mean, when you've got surplus energy flying around, and that can get you into trouble, can't it? It can encourage you to do something unwise. You might make a mistake. I suppose you might have a minor accident. This is how Mars semi-square Jupiter could work if it gets out of hand. Now, of course, it may not impact you. If you're feeling completely calm all day long, then that would be a suggestion that the Mars semi-square Jupiter is not working in a harmful way, or perhaps the Mars Jupiter semi-square is being used properly. And Scorpio, it's probably a day when you shouldn't be asking too many questions, and you shouldn't feel that everything has to be perfect, that all the details have to be in order. It's not that kind of day. It shouldn't be that kind of day. And the full moon today, the moon in Cancer opposition with sun in Capricorn, should encourage you to perhaps go beyond yourself, go beyond the annoying little details. You might think they're important. I think there's a tendency for you to be over-concerned about small details, but if you can somehow go beyond these details, or perhaps worry about them later, they don't have to be sorted out right now, and if you can sort of allow yourself to get some height. I mean, getting height can actually be very important for Scorpios, because if you stay at ground level, then you can't see what's going on. And yeah, you might obsess about things which really shouldn't be obsessed about, but when you get height, you get perspective. And I think that this full moon should be allowing you to get perspective. When you get perspective, you start to see the truth. And when you see the truth, everything just becomes clear, and you can really start to feel a sense that you are realizing your full potential. Now, Mars is conjunct the Sun-Pluto midpoint. You can see this on the chart because Mars has just had an opposition to Pluto over the last couple of months. Now the Sun is starting to make an opposition to Mars, and Mars is halfway between the two. So we can say Mars is on the Sun-Pluto conjunction. This Mars on the Sun-Pluto conjunction could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. It kind of depends how you handle it. In a negative sense, Mars on the Sun-Pluto Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint may encourage you to just overdo it, to get obsessed, to get completely obsessed about things which you should not be obsessed about. And this is something I think I've already suggested. You shouldn't get too worried about small facts, things that don't necessarily make sense. That's not something you should do. You should give yourself some space and give yourself some perspective. But still, with Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint, you could just go into yourself too much, and that could actually create a lot of anger. On the other hand, Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint could be quite refreshing. It could allow you to move beyond your immediate environment. It gives you the impetus to be able to really create change. And that change you should start that process of change within yourself. It's not necessarily about other people and what other people are doing or not doing. It's about you creating the possibility of that change and you having a transformative impact. Now, Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint, maybe I should just give you an objective view of what Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint means. By objective, I mean not my view. So Reinhold Ebertin, in his combination of stellar influences, he goes through the midpoints, and I just thought it'd be interesting to see what he says about Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint and whether you feel it has any relevance to you. So Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint, Reinhold Ebertin says, in a positive sense, the desire to perform record achievements. I mean, that's good. But then it goes on to say, overexertion or overtaxing one's powers, ruthlessness, the tendency to work to the point of a physical breakdown. Now, I don't take that too seriously, but you can see what Ebertin is saying. Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint might encourage you to take something too far, to be over-focused. So you kind of have to know when to stop, and you also have to be constructive and ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing? Because I think there's a danger with Mars on the Mars opposition, the Sun-Pluto midpoint, that you don't know when to stop, and that is perhaps about obsession. I mean, achievement is good, but the desire for overachievement, the desire for things to be absolutely perfect, is something that could be problematic. So I think with this midpoint structure, it certainly indicates that you have a lot of power. But the question is, what do you do with that power? And you don't want to become obsessed, and you don't want to take things too far. Sagittarius, we have the moon continuing to move through Cancer, and with the moon moving through Cancer, you perhaps feel that you want to hold something back. You're not ready to be completely in the swing of things, and you might be somewhat wary of the world around you. It's a complicated place, and also you've got things to think about, and the moon is not just in Cancer, it's opposition the sun. In other words, there is a full moon, and this full moon perhaps encourages you to go beyond what you can see in front of you. This full moon, from a sort of obviously it's astrological, but in terms of the jargon, we could say that from a Sagittarian point of view, this full moon is in the 8th house, because the moon is in the 8th house, the sun is in the 2nd house, and the 8th house can be about things which are complicated. And it can also be about matters of life and death. I mean, not literally. I mean, don't get too concerned about death, but it does encourage you to take things seriously and to move beyond surface appearances. That's the sun in Capricorn. The sun in Capricorn is a nice, stable, solid. The sun is in a nice, solid, stable sign, but the moon in Cancer is challenging the sun in Capricorn. It's encouraging you to look below the surface and to ask questions, and I suppose to recognize how complicated things are. And this full moon happens at the same time as a semi-square aspect between Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter is, of course, your ruler. And so with Mars semi-square Jupiter, there is a possibility of overaction, taking things too far. It's important to understand the complications of life, but you don't want to get obsessed by them. And there is some danger that some Sagittarians feel that maybe they don't have enough control or not enough power, and with Mars semi-square Jupiter, they might feel that they have to really ramp things up. They're not sure why, but they just feel it's just something they have to do. And by ramping things up, you might end up causing perhaps a lot of trouble. Though on the plus side, there's no doubt that you have the ability to really make things happen. I mean, you can see this in the chart. So when I was talking to Scorpio and Aries, I mentioned the fact that Mars is opposition the Sun-Pluto conjunction. So and I was talking about maybe overachievement, or Ebertin was talking, Reinhold Ebertin, I was quoting from Reinhold Ebertin in the combination of stellar influences, and he was talking about the potential for overachievement, taking things too far, almost going to the point of breakdown. But Jupiter is actually tied into that Mars opposition, the Sun-Pluto conjunction, because Jupiter is making a semi-square to Mars. In other words, Jupiter is sesquiquadrate the Sun-Pluto conjunction. So, like with Aries and Scorpios, Sagittarius, there is a possibility that once you decide you want to get into something, you decide something is important, you really push it, and you end up perhaps taking things too far. You go over the top. And the question is, why would you do that? I think one reason you might do that is because you feel that you don't have enough power. Perhaps because Jupiter, your ruler, is in Gemini, your opposite sign. You're aware that to an extent other people are calling the shots, or at least that's how it feels. And so you might be of a view that you have to react. And you certainly can react, Sagittarius. You can react in a very extreme way. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you handle things correctly and you know your limits, I think that you can really do a lot. you can really get to the bottom of things, and there may even be a resolution. But if you have a poorly defined set of goals, then you could just push things too far. You don't know when to stop. You don't know when you've reached your destination, and that could get yourself into a real mess. So Sagittarius, maybe you should be thinking about what you're trying to achieve over the course of the day and trying to be reasonable about it. And once you've achieved it to some satisfaction, it doesn't have to be completely perfect, but once you're feeling content that you're pretty close to where you want to be, then maybe you should just rest up. So the overall message, Sagittarius, is really don't take things too far and don't feel you have to try too hard to be in control. Capricorn, there is a full moon today. Okay, it could be tomorrow, but this full moon is across the main axis of your chart. You've got the sun in Capricorn, moon in Cancer, and so with this full moon, there is going to be a certain emphasis on relationships, on other people, on things that you don't have full control over. And if you look at your chart, sun is in Capricorn. It is the Capricorn season. Sun is going to be in Capricorn for the next 5 days. I think the sun goes out of Capricorn on Sunday. So, it's a time when Capricorns have a sense of themselves and what they'd like to be doing. But the moon is a challenge. That challenge could come from another person. It just could be a situation that you don't fully understand, that you're not able to fully control, and that situation may be something which to begin with is difficult to deal with. Now, there is a way to deal with it, and the way to deal with it is to be quite accepting, because full moons do show you the truth. I mean, they give the possibility of you seeing the truth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to see the truth, but they certainly give you the possibility of that truth being realized, and you can see, if you look hard enough, what makes people tick, and you can see what's important to other people. And if you have that kind of awareness, that allows you to act accordingly, and that actually gives you more control. So in order to see the sun in Capricorn through, by seeing the sun in Capricorn through, I mean seeing it through until it moves into Aquarius, making the most of the last 5 days of the Capricorn season, it would just be a good idea to consider outside influences and be honest about it, and give something away perhaps, but you don't have to give too much away. And in that way you'll be able to sort of make sense of the full moon. Now, the full moon can be about relationships. It can be about how relationships change. A classic interpretation of a full moon is to say that you understand someone, you perhaps understand someone you're in a relationship with, and then that allows you to make a decision. And that would particularly apply if it's a new relationship or you're just getting to know someone. With this full moon, you see who they are, and you then start to consider, is this the right person for you? And it's not just about romance, it's any kind of connection. It could just be a passing connection. It could be full moon, someone is perhaps in the process of trying to sell you something, and we're getting close to a signature maybe, and this full moon gives you a chance to have another look at it, to have another look at the small print. Is this someone you can trust? Maybe not. Maybe they are completely trustworthy, but the full moon allows you to understand people at whatever level. And the sun in Capricorn, additionally, it makes a trine to Uranus, and the sun trine Uranus, it's a relatively powerful aspect. Uranus is a fairly revolutionary influence, and Uranus can give you perhaps a new view and allow you to see things in a different way and to act potentially quite dramatically. You're acting dramatically because it's something that comes from you, and you know it's right, and perhaps it's been building up for years. Uranus moves into Gemini next year. I mean, it sort of goes back and forth between Taurus and Gemini as it goes direct, retrograde. But Uranus has been in Taurus for quite a long time. Taurus is a sign that is connected with your creativity, and with the sun trine Uranus, this is just another reminder of what sets you apart. I mean, what sets you apart in a positive sense. And so perhaps you can utilize this sun trine Uranus to really tell everyone who you are, tell the world who you are. And that might feed into the full moon in terms of realizations about the world, other people you have to deal with. This realization might be about who is supportive, who can handle you, who is going to give you what you want, who is going to allow you to be an individual. Some people don't want you to be an individual. They've got an idea about how you should behave, and they just want you to accommodate them. And with this full moon trine Uranus, I mean, you've got the sun trine Uranus, you've got the moon sextile Uranus. It may, in certain cases, be a time when you want to have a break. You feel that a relationship has gone far enough, or perhaps a relationship needs to change because you're not getting enough respect. I mean, that is another possibility. But the respect relates to who you are and who you fundamentally are. And this can also be about, back to what people trying to sell you things. People, when they're trying to sell you things, they just treat you, I suppose, as a customer, as a source of money, or banks trying to sell you a product. They don't really necessarily look at your individual life circumstances. And with Sun trine Uranus, you've definitely got individual life circumstances, good and bad. I mean, it could be all good, but circumstances don't have to be bad. It's just what makes you an individual, and it's important that everyone you deal with accepts your individuality. And financial products, any form of product, whatever you're doing, maybe you're buying a car or a washing machine or whatever it is, it needs to fit you as an individual, and the other person may not be thinking about you as an individual. They're perhaps just concerned about doing a deal, getting the money. So I think overall, Capricorn, that this full moon is good. It allows you to understand other people's individuality, and it forces other people to accept your individuality. And if you realize that other people do not accept your individuality, then you are in a position to perhaps make a break, or alternatively put someone in their place. Aquarius, there is a full moon today, or it could be tomorrow. I'm not saying that this full moon is necessarily super dramatic. I mean, it's not in your sign, but I think it's going to affect every sign at some level. And with this full moon, it's probably a time when you should be trying to create a certain amount of order. It may be that recently there are certain things in your life that maybe have got a little bit chaotic. You've perhaps lost touch with them, and you perhaps don't know where things are, and that hasn't bothered you too much. But now it does bother you, and this full moon encourages you to just straighten things out in a way that is perhaps fairly routine, not something that, strictly speaking, you would like to do. But the thing about disorder is that disorder can build up, and you don't realize that the disorder is building up, and it can build up for months, and then suddenly you see it for what it is. And that might be how the full moon is working. You can see the disorder around you, and that disorder can take many forms. It might not be about physical disorder. It just might be about things that you don't understand, things that you've sort of lost touch with. But anyway, you see it all, and as a result, you're prepared to take action. You suddenly realize what needs to be done. So that full moon is a spur to activity, but this full moon is not massively important to you, I don't think. I think it's more likely, in fact, to impact other people. Some of the people close to you may be impacted by the full moon, but not necessarily you. So over the course of the day, I mean, maybe, I suppose, over the course of the next fortnight. I mean, the question is, how long does the full moon take to run its course? But certain people might be in sort of a state of change, and perhaps if it's not you wanting to sort everything out, you might actually start to see that someone else is frantic to put something in order. I mean, I said a couple of weeks. I mean, I suppose that would be between the full moon, which is today, and the sun going into Aquarius. So it's at those 5 degrees from the sun, 6 degrees, nearly a week. And then the sun goes into Aquarius on Sunday. But between now and Sunday, for the rest of the week, you may just find that some people are more concerned about sorting things out, trying to sort themselves out than usual. And what can you do? I suppose you can be supportive, though there is Sun opposition Mars coming up in a few days' time. And Sun opposition Mars, there may be a little bit of anger there, someone being concerned about what things look like and how things are organized. And they might want to take it out on you. So if you feel that there is something you're involved with that is a little bit chaotic and messy, and you haven't paid enough attention to it, and you're concerned that someone else might respond badly to it, then maybe with this full moon you can sort it out quick. You sort it out quick, and no one will notice. It'll be sort of, out of sight, out of mind. So that could be a way of steering clear of trouble, particularly if you're a sort of a messier Aquarian, or sort of a less responsible Aquarian, someone who does let things slip a bit. We can't all be perfect. So that might be a constructive way in which you can use the energy of the full moon. It could save you some trouble. And at the same time, Aquarius, I think today you're going to be quite inspired in spite of everything. There may be things going on which I've just talked about which don't seem very inspiring at all, but you still have a good mind, a very good mind, and you can just have sudden ideas, sudden inspirations. Perhaps the energy of a full moon is actually going to help these inspirations come out, and you just suddenly realize something. And this sense of inspiration actually has been going on for a couple of days, but it may be really hitting peak form today and tomorrow with the full moon, and you just suddenly understand something that you hadn't understood. You hadn't really understood it before. You hadn't got it together before, but now it's clear, and it's exciting. And perhaps, when the sun moves into Aquarius at the end of a week, you'll have a chance to take this idea and actually put it into action. Pisces. Pisces, we have Venus slowly moving towards a conjunction to Saturn. I think I've already mentioned this. Now this conjunction between Venus and Saturn is not exact until the end of the week, but it's something that you should pay attention to. Now, the way I see this Venus-Saturn conjunction from your perspective is that in some respects Saturn is you. And I know you're not Saturn, that Saturn is not the ruler of Pisces, but while Saturn is in Pisces, there is a sense in which it might be. And Venus conjunct Saturn could be about someone moving towards you. Someone who, I think, got quite a lot to offer, and it may be about some kind of relationship that is developing, or a person who just feels drawn to you. Maybe they feel that you've got some good advice to offer, that you can present a certain level of security. That's perhaps not how one normally thinks of Pisces, in terms of security, groundedness. But at the moment with Saturn in Pisces, that does represent you and perhaps your experience and your developing experience that you've been feeling ever since Saturn went into Pisces at the beginning of 2023. So do have an open heart and be aware of other people and consider how you can be of use to them. Of course, you don't want to be taken advantage of. That can be a problem with Pisceans. Pisceans can think the best of people, and they can get themselves into trouble, but they can be too trusting. So I'm not asking you to be too trusting, but you're not going to be too trusting at the moment with Saturn moving through, with Saturn continuing to move through Pisces. And another thing going on, arguably the main thing going on, is the full moon. So we've got moon in Cancer in a water sign, opposition Capricorn, opposition Sun in Capricorn, and this full moon is also, I think, about other people. And it's other people, not necessarily as individuals, but other people more as a group, as a collective, and how you should see them and where the conflict lies. Because when you've got a full moon, you've always, to an extent, got a conflict because the moon is opposition the sun. And you could say that the moon in Capricorn represents, to an extent, you. It represents everything you're trying to get off the ground, the things you're working on, and I think that you're making good progress. But that Sun in Capricorn could represent something holding you back, challenging you, questioning you, maybe trying to encourage you to have self-doubt. And self-doubt is one thing you absolutely don't want to have. And so with this full moon, you perhaps realize that you can't be everyone's friend. Not everyone is supportive of you. And I do mean this more on a sort of collective level. It's quite separate from what I was saying with that Venus making a conjunction to Saturn. That Venus conjunct Saturn, someone moving towards you, that's more on a sort of an individual basis. Individuals who, find you may be attractive, but they feel you have got something that you can help them with. But this full moon is different. That's perhaps about you being undermined by group processes. You're thinking the groups of people are important. Certain types of people, you have to make them happy. But the full moon is about you holding fast to what you believe in and what you can do. And the moon is actually making a conjunction to Mars. Now that Moon-Mars conjunction is exact tomorrow, and that might be about defending what makes you special, defending your creativity and your individuality. And individuality really does matter. And for a Piscean, it really, really matters. I mean, I suppose Pisces is the sign of the sea, and the sea, in one level, sort of gravitates against individuality because you are part of the sea. And I suppose many types of fish, they like to go in move around in a shoal, and they move from one side to another, and they move very quickly. I mean, not all fish act in a shoal. I mean, sharks, I don't think you don't get shoals of sharks, do you? Or maybe you do, I don't know. But, when I was looking at Venus in Pisces, relatively recently I had on the thumbnail a shark. And I think that perhaps is a worthy image for a Pisces. It's a reminder that perhaps Pisceans can be tough. They can look after themselves. And if anyone gets in their way, they're quite capable of being assertive, even aggressive. And so with Moon conjunct Mars, there are things that you need to hold on tightly to, and you shouldn't just become part of the shoal, even though I think that there is a certain temptation with this full moon to be part of something bigger than yourself. But I don't think that should happen unless it is completely on your terms. It is possible to be part of the group and also for you to be completely special. But it can be a difficult balancing act. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got, in fact, the only hexagram I got was hexagram number 60, which is limitation. And limitation, in a way, is a quite simple hexagram, especially as it doesn't move. It doesn't have any moving lines. It just means that we need to understand our limits. And because there are no moving lines, that might indicate that today not a great deal is going to happen. So regardless of what the astrology says, and astrologically there is some drama going on, there is Sun trine Uranus, we got the build up to the full moon, but we don't have to be doing lots of different things. We need to focus on what we can do and making sure that we do it properly. And I think that we're going to be tempted to take things too far. perhaps because of that Mars semi-square Jupiter. Mars semi-square Jupiter, is about overexertion. Mars is a dynamic planet. Jupiter exaggerates whatever it touches. So Mars semi-square Jupiter, we really want to push things, take things as far as we can. But hexagram 60 is saying just calm down. There are limits to what you can achieve. If you try to take things too far, you're going to be sorry. But because there are no moving lines, I think perhaps limitation is going to be relatively easy. There's not going to necessarily be the call for action. Now, when you have a locked hexagram, a hexagram where there are no moving lines, you can perhaps get some added information by looking at the nuclear hexagram. The nuclear hexagram is when you knock off the top and the bottom lines, and you then take the top, then you've got 4 lines in the middle, and you take the top 3 as the top and then the bottom 3 as the bottom. So the nuclear hexagram is hexagram 27, which is the corners of the mouth. And the corners of the mouth obviously represents the mouth. And I suppose you can see that the hexagram kind of looks a bit like a mouth, the sort of top line, top and bottom lines of the 2 lips, and the corners of the mouth in terms of trying to relate that to limitation. Now, corners of the mouth can be about talking. I mean, obviously, because 2 lips, talking, the words are coming out of the mouth, and you throw in limitation. And so limitation, it may be that we have to be particularly careful about what we say. We have got lots of things we would like to say, but perhaps we shouldn't say everything on our mind. We should save a lot of our thoughts for later. I mean, we shouldn't, though, repress what we want to say, because with this hexagram 60, the I Ching warns against what it calls galling limitation. We limit ourselves and it's painful. It hurts to limit ourselves. It's like an act of suffering. The I Ching doesn't want you to do that. Well, unless, of course, limitation relates to some addiction. I mean, if you've just given up smoking, sometimes you have to deal with galling limitation. That's just the way it is. More so with other more dangerous drugs that one might have given up. So sometimes galling limitation you might have to go through with it. But I think in most cases, on a day-to-day level, we don't want to torture ourselves. And so going back to this nuclear hexagram of the corners of the mouth, if we feel that there's something we really have to say, and we think it's important to say it, then yes, of course, we have to say it. Corners of the mouth can also be about what we eat. And I suppose if you throw limitation corners of the mouth, you get perhaps the concept of dietary restriction. And there may be a sense with limitation that some of us are trying to restrict what we eat. I suppose it's a new year, going on a diet, or not eating certain foods, maybe deciding to be a vegetarian or a vegan or whatever. I'm not saying being a vegan is necessarily a good thing. I mean, you've also, you've got to watch your calcium and all of that. For myself, I'm a vegetarian, but veganism always seemed to me a step too far. But with limitation, and when we think of a nuclear hexagram, the corners of the mouth, maybe one is thinking about dietary restriction, though remember the point about galling limitation. You don't want to take things to the level where you are completely starving and you're just suffering for the sake of suffering. And a final way in which one can see limitation and using the corners of the mouth to try to understand what it means is that what the I Ching says about the corners of the mouth, and it's kind of an interesting point, is that one can understand someone through what they eat or through what nurtures them. So, it's what someone is talking about all the time. If someone is talking about money all the time, then they're obsessed about money, maybe. What makes them happy? Some people may be happy when there's money around them. Some people are happy when it's all about power. Some people are happy when they are helping other people and doing charity work. Whatever nurtures people. And so, in terms of limitation, going back to this hexagram and how it relates to one's social life, one should be thinking about what nurtures people, what makes people happy, and that might limit us in terms of how we deal with certain people. We may observe that some people are obsessed about things which we're uncomfortable with, and as a result, we might want to limit our connections with them because perhaps we've seen the truth of the matter. And of course, we do have a full moon today, and so the full moon may allow us to see the truth of the matter. And now it's actually time to look at that full moon. So here is the chart of the full moon, which happens today, January the 13th, 2025, at 10:27 p.m. London time. This chart is set for Westminster, London. So we can, of course, say the usual general stuff about full moons, which I've already talked about in this video. Full moons are a time of truth. They are when the lunar cycle peaks and we see things for the way they are. I mean that makes sense, doesn't it? The moon is full, and so we have the light of the moon, and we can see things as clearly as is possible. But that doesn't mean that we're going to actually do anything about it. That's often the case, isn't it? One can know the truth about something, one can completely understand the truth, one can understand the truth about oneself, but still it doesn't make any difference. One just continues. We can also find the truth about other people. Just because we find the truth about another person doesn't mean that we change our behavior. And this full moon is trine Uranus, and it is conjunct Mars. I think that is what most astrologers will be looking at. They'll put a lot of emphasis on the trine to Uranus. So there is the sun at 24 Capricorn. Full moon is it 24? Is it 24 Cancer? So there's Uranus, making a fairly close trine to the sun, fairly close sextile to the moon. And you could see that Uranus in a completely positive way. This is an enlightening full moon. We see the truth of the matter. We can tune into our individuality. And that's certainly the case. We can perhaps understand what makes us different. We can maybe tune into our inner revolutionary. And Uranus is making a trine to the full moon, not a square. So the trine, the sextile, is kind of an easier aspect. It's not so much effort. So perhaps with this full moon, we're going to find it relatively easy to be an individual, relatively easy to cause change. So that's something positive that we can say about this full moon. And we then have the fact that this full moon is actually quite close to Mars. It's not exactly on Mars, but it's close enough. It's 3 degrees 5 minutes from Mars. So it does have a certain Mars feel to it. And that might mean that there's a bit of aggression with this full moon. We perhaps realise that we haven't been treated well. We perhaps realise that we have to assert ourselves, that we have to tell the world we exist and that we have power. So I suppose that could be positive, but then we fit this together with the fact that the full moon is trine sextile Uranus and it's also linked up with Mars. It can be quite a willful and angry full moon if we don't get our way. So that's certainly a possibility that we have with this lunation. And we then have to consider what is happening at the same time as this full moon, because a full moon, in a way, is a gateway. It's a gateway to whatever is happening out there in the universe, in the cosmos, specifically the solar system, and that gateway allows this energy to flood into the world, into our everyday lives. And how long does it last for? The full moon can last 2 weeks, maybe a month. 2 weeks for it to be particularly strong. Although you could say, well, maybe things will change a bit when the sun goes into Aquarius. So certainly I would have said it would last for a minimum of 5 days until Sunday when the sun goes into Aquarius. Although there is an argument, of course, that full moons manifest before they happen, that we've already been experiencing this full moon. I suppose you could say a full moon on Mars, trine sextile Uranus. I suppose you look at what's happening in Los Angeles with the fires. Although I think one has to be a little bit careful here, because I'm often worried that one takes something like this and one tries to use it to explain everything. And so I think one has to perhaps be careful that I wouldn't myself have wanted to say that one can explain the Los Angeles fires on the basis of a full moon that happened a week later. The full moon may be more about the aftermath of the Los Angeles fires and perhaps the political consequences and, of course, the human consequences. So those are sort of a few of the main features of this full moon. And I was talking about a gateway. So you have to consider, what are the other aspects going on at the time of this full moon? And at the time of this full moon, there was a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. There is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. And you can see that Mars is... there's Mars, 2705 Cancer. There's Jupiter, 1203 Gemini. So 45 degrees with only a 2-minute orb. So that Mars-Jupiter semi-square is very much part of what this full moon is all about. And I think it is a high-energy full moon. And with the moon sextile Uranus, sun sextile Uranus, moon conjunct Mars semi-square Jupiter, a lot of energy, a lot of action. Things are happening, well, left, right and centre, I would have said. So it is certainly busy. And if you can look at the hypothetical planets to perhaps get a different view, perhaps an alternative view, or so if we look at the hypothetical planets, just set these up. These I use sort of Vitter's hypothetical planets, and so if let's just show you what I mean by these hypothetical planets. So let's turn on the hypotheticals. And the hypothetical planet that I am especially interested in is Zeus. So here is... where's Zeus gone? Zeus. Zeus at 2531 Libra. Now, Zeus is making a sesquiquadrate to Venus, and I think we need to be aware of this Zeus sesquiquadrate Venus. I mean, it might not seem immediately apparent, but it's not okay. It's not a super exact sesquiquadrate, but don't worry, it becomes clear later on. Zeus actually plays a leading role in actually understanding this full moon. So it's not just that it's sesquiquadrate Venus. It's actually quite close to the full moon itself. So it's making a square. So it's making a sesquiquadrate to Venus, and there's the moon at 24 degrees Cancer. There's the sun at 24 degrees Capricorn, and there's Zeus at 25:31 Libra. Okay, it might seem a little bit wide. 1 degree and 31 minutes might seem a bit wide, but I think that it emphasizes the point, though. Zeus as a planet is about sudden action. It's often associated with explosives, with gunshots. It's quite a military aspect, but it can be sudden events, and events which can change everything. And so it does emphasize the point. But I think this really is a high energy new moon. Zeus, I suppose you could see Zeus as being a different octave of Jupiter. I hesitate to say it's a higher octave of Jupiter. Maybe, but Zeus perhaps represents the impulsiveness of Jupiter. And going back to the concept of sudden action, and leading on from the hypotheticals, one should look at this full moon from the viewpoint of the dial. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at the new moon, what's actually happening from a perspective of a 90-degree dial, which is sort of the fourth harmonic. And here's Zeus on the 90-degree dial. And I think you see what I mean here with Zeus. If I put Zeus on, if I put the arrow on Zeus, and remember this is a 90-degree dial where conjunctions and squares and oppositions all become conjunctions, and semisquares and sesquiquadrates become oppositions. So you can see that Zeus is on the Moon-Mars midpoint, and it's on the Sun-Mars midpoint. So what Zeus does is it brings together Mars, which in itself is semi-square Jupiter. So it brings together a strong Mars with the new moon. So it kind of moderates and brings together the new moon and Mars. And we know that Zeus is quite an explosive energy. So I think that's something we really have to look out for. I think it emphasizes that this is quite a dramatic, quite an explosive full moon. And there might be sort of a few other aspects that we see at the time of the full moon. One thing that strikes me is that at the time of this full moon, there is a Cupido-Uranus opposition. So this Cupido-Uranus opposition, Cupido is another hypothetical planet. It's to do with love and unions. Although Cupido was first discovered, if discovered is the right word, so Alfred Witter was trying to predict artillery barrages during the First World War, and he couldn't use the traditional he found the traditional planets weren't telling him when the barrages were happening, so he felt he he had to kind of reverse engineer the whole thing to discover his own planets. And Cupido was the first planet he discovered. So in fact, Cupido, I believe, was first associated with artillery barrages until it became associated with love and unions and so forth. So you could say that Cupido opposition Uranus, there may be something about this full moon which is about sudden unions, unexpected marriages. In fact, I was reading an article talking about sudden unions. It was about India and the shotgun weddings, and apparently in India, I mean, this has got nothing to do with the astrology, I'm just pointing this out, and it seemed to be a very Uranus Cupido thing, that in India it's very difficult to get government jobs, and there's huge competition to get government jobs. But getting a government job is a really big deal, and it provides a secure income, and so it's not just for oneself, but obviously one's able to look after one's family and whatever. And so a man in certain parts of India, I think this was in sort of Bihar and sort of northeast India, if he gets a government job, he becomes vulnerable to a shotgun wedding. He will be kidnapped by a potential bride's family and forced into a marriage. And these criminal gangs will not just guarantee that they're paid to force a man to get married, and then not just that, but then the criminal gangs will often then guarantee that it can sort of be a happy marriage. So they'll somehow force this man to sort of go through with the marriage and be the husband it is expected. I don't know about the reason. I mean, it's really complicated. I think one of the reasons is that the wife's family avoid having to pay a dowry this way. But I mean, I just thought I'd point that out, and that did seem to very much tie in with Uranus opposition Cupido. I mean, it's not this is something I'd had heard of before, so it's not something completely new. But they've now used technology and monitoring websites, where men in India, they apply for jobs, and somehow criminal gangs are monitoring how the job proceeds, and yeah, it's a real nightmare. It was talking about, I don't know, someone got a job as a teacher and he had to run away because he was being pursued by the woman he was forced to marry, literally at gunpoint. He was trying to escape from her family. So yeah, so that could be Cupido opposition Uranus. So that's that. So overall, if you're looking for, I suppose, a fast marriage, if that really is important to you, you want to get into a relationship quickly, and suddenly, out of the blue, I suppose you could say Cupido opposition Uranus at the time of this full moon could have some influence on it. So I now wanted to look at a few sort of parts of the world that might be impacted. I mean, I didn't come across anything especially dramatic, but anyway, let's look at the astro map for this. I sort of tend to end up sort of focusing on Europe, but there was nothing specific that came about. There was just a lot of activity here. There's a lot of activity. You see, these are the red lines. These red lines. These are all the places where the moon and Mars are conjunct the midheaven, and that full moon. So it kind of goes through Finland, Eastern Europe, Belarus, Bulgaria, Romania, and Western Ukraine. So the Balkans, Eastern Europe could potentially be stirred up by this full moon. I think that there's also potentially some activity through the Americas. I'll be looking at the chart for the for Washington DC in a moment, and something's going on with Moscow, but it doesn't show up on this map. I'll have to look at Moscow individually. So anyway, let's look at some individual charts to get an idea. So here's Washington DC. So this is Washington DC. This is the full moon before Donald Trump's inauguration, and Mars is on the ascendant. I mean, it's not exactly on the ascendant, but I would have said that it was close enough, and so that kind of may indicate the tension around the time of the inauguration, perhaps the anger in some quarters, and that moon, the full moon itself, it's close to the ascendant. It's not exactly on the ascendant. Full moon may not just talk about the US itself in terms of what's happening internally, may talk about the US's foreign relations, but it's quite an angry full moon already, and you set that to the United States, and I don't think that the United States is particularly going to be at peace with itself in the week prior to Donald Trump's inauguration. And I've just looked at London, Westminster. South Node is South Node is on the ascendant. That is not great. North Node and Neptune are on a descendant. Full moon is in the 10th. I don't think it's necessarily super dramatic for the UK, but I think in my next video I will be talking about the UK in more detail, so I don't want to say anything more about the country right now. And then we have Kiev. You always got to consider what's happening in Ukraine. Mars is conjunct the midheaven, set for Ukraine. So, does it mean anything different? You know, there's always a war going on in Ukraine. You could say that Mars is always on the midheaven with Ukraine. So, how is that going to make anything different? Well, Mars conjunct the midheaven might be about the presidency and the pressure that, for example, Zelensky is under. It may say something about the military situation. The full moon, again, quite close to the midheaven, and so that's not necessarily about the military situation, but more perhaps about the political situation and how power is working in Ukraine. Then, if we move a little bit further east, we have Moscow. So here is the chart set for Moscow. So at first sight, you don't see very much. You see the full moon in Cancer in the 9th house. I mean, that's not that spectacular, is it? But when we turn on the hypothetical planets, we see something slightly different. Let's turn on the hypothetical planets. Where are they gone here? So if we turn on the hypothetical planets, look at Zeus, the planet that I've just been talking about. Zeus conjunct the ascendant, and Zeus is kind of on the Sun-Moon midpoint, and Zeus is also making a sesquiquadrate to Venus. So with this full moon, with Zeus on the ascendant, this may be a time when the war in Ukraine actually does escalate. I mean, I know it's already escalating, but maybe at some level with this Zeus, Moscow may feel it really needs to up the pace, and something may happen in the war which is perhaps somewhat unexpected. We see things in a different light. I think that Zeus is a sign that something's going to happen. I mean, okay, it could be some attack on Russia. I mean, Ukraine is always trying to do something clever, some dramatic spectacle. I mean, generally, for PR purposes. But I think this is, to my mind, is about Russia and its military power and what it's trying to do. So it may be that the full moon marks sort of quite a decisive phase in the war in Ukraine, perhaps over the next couple of weeks. So those are a few countries that might be impacted by the full moon, and I want to finish by looking at some people. And the first person I want to look at is Donald Trump. I mean, why not? I mean, he's about to become president, and so here is Donald Trump's chart, and Saturn. He's got his Saturn at 2349 Cancer. Now, this full moon is at 24 Cancer. So this full moon is exactly on Trump's Saturn. So how do we see this? Now, Trump's Saturn on the surface is not very well placed because it's in Cancer and the sign of its detriment. However, his Saturn is in mutual reception with Jupiter by exaltation, because Saturn is in Cancer, the exaltation of Jupiter. Jupiter's in Libra, the exaltation of Saturn. And additionally, if you use the whole sign house system, this is Placidus. I mean, I generally prefer to use Placidus. But if you were to use the whole sign house system, Saturn is in the 12th, and you could say that Saturn joys in the 12th. Another thing about Saturn is that Saturn is a day ruler. Not day ruler. Saturn is a diurnal planet. It functions best at day, and it is a daylight. And Trump was born by day. So it could be with this full moon on his Saturn that this is just Trump becoming president. All the responsibilities of Trump being in power, though we perhaps have to think about how it really impacts him. I mean, he does have Saturn aspecting the Mars node midpoint. Actually, you can see it here. There's the Mars, there's the node, and so he's got Saturn exactly on the Mars node midpoint. And so, what does it mean to have Saturn on the Mars node midpoint? I mean, what does Eberton say about having Saturn on the Mars node midpoint? Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily accurate. It's just Eberton's view about Saturn on the Mars node midpoint. And I think it's important because I think we often neglect Trump's Cancer planets. Eberton says, reserve, inhibitions with regard to others, disadvantages or difficulties through unions or associations, teamwork which is rendered more difficult as time goes on, separation. So he has this capacity, perhaps, not to be a team player, if you take Eberton's view. And that sort of makes sense. If you take Mars node representing vigorous connections, working hard with other people, and then you put Saturn on the Mars node midpoint, that may represent disagreements. So perhaps with this full moon on his Saturn, he's trying to assemble his team, he's trying to get people to work with him, and it may not work as well as he had hoped. I mean, it may be about his ego. He may fall out with people. I mean, by the way, I must make it absolutely clear, I'm not biased in favor of Trump. I'm not biased against Trump. I'm just simply looking at the astrology. If I were to advise Trump with this full moon, I would really suggest that he's very careful about how he works with his team, with his transition team. And it could just be that there are sort of egos flying around and people wanting to be in control and it not working out. He also has Saturn aspecting his Mercury-Pluto midpoint. So there's a sort of power struggle for ideas. So it suggests to me that this transition actually for Trump may not be particularly easy. So a couple of other politicians who may be impacted by this full moon, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu, I don't know when exactly he was born late morning. A general view seems to be that he has Sagittarius rising. I've gone for 11:45 a.m. And his Jupiter is at, where's his Jupiter gone? His Jupiter is at 2401 Capricorn. In other words, this full moon is exactly on his Capricorn. Sorry, on his Jupiter in Capricorn. Netanyahu also has Jupiter exactly square his true black moon Lilith. So this full moon is activating his Jupiter black moon Lilith square. I mean, I don't know how seriously we take this, but as far as the full moon is concerned, this is Netanyahu's Jupiter in Capricorn going into overdrive. Again, I am not giving you any opinion on Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm just looking at the astrology. He has Jupiter in Capricorn. One of the problems with Jupiter in Capricorn is that, Jupiter is fallen in Capricorn. And so with Jupiter in Capricorn, Jupiter may not always work too well. It can be a little bit mean, actually, Jupiter in Capricorn. Too focused on self-interest. But with the full moon on Jupiter, his own ambitions come into play, and to the extent to which he can achieve his ambitions come into play. And I think there might be a certain danger that he takes things too far, particularly when you throw in true black moon Lilith. I mean, too far perhaps in terms of a political situation in Israel, perhaps in terms of what Israel is doing. I mean, we know that it's advancing beyond the Golan Heights. It's gone into parts of Syria. So maybe some danger of overreach. And I would be hesitant to say that this full moon on Netanyahu's Jupiter is going to be fortunate. I'm not convinced about that. Again, he needs to be careful about what he does, and he has to be careful about overextending his power. I would have said with this Jupiter on his, with this full moon on his Jupiter. I mean, in terms of his midpoints, I mean, he does actually have Jupiter on the sun square the Sun Moon midpoint. Now, assuming he really was born late morning, then that does make his Jupiter extra powerful. If he's got Sun on his Jupiter midpoint, here is a man that is larger than life. So he's got the full moon on his Sun Moon midpoint. He's got potentially black moon Lilith on his Sun Moon midpoint. So I think this full moon for Benjamin Netanyahu is important, and I think he needs to be very careful. He doesn't want to take things too far. Another politician who is impacted by this full moon is a politician I don't really know anything about, and that is Sarah Wagenknecht. So Sarah Wagenknecht she was born on July the 16th, 1969 at noon. She is a German politician who has her own party. Well, it's a party, I think it's called the Sarah Wagenknecht Party. Is that the Bund Sarah Wagenknecht? I don't know. I don't speak German. But so she has a sort of a left-wing party, but a party that's kind of interesting because it's quite socially conservative. It's not pro-immigration. It's not obsessed with transgender rights, and I believe it has taken a lot of votes from another left-wing party, which was it Der Linke? And so Sarah Wagenknecht, I suppose, will be preparing for the federal elections on February the 23rd in Germany. So her son, I don't have a time of birth for her, is at 2343 Cancer. So it will be, roughly between 2315 and 2415 Cancer. So this full moon is right on her sun, and so I think at some level this full moon is going to have an impact upon her and in her preparations for the election. So, I mean, I don't really have the ability to follow German politics closely, but if you're in Germany, you might want to look at what's happening to Sarah Wagenknecht and her party, and what kind of pressures she's under. I mean, a full moon can be about opportunities, but I would have thought, all things being equal, possibly not particularly positive this full moon. She might have perhaps some realizations about how much she can achieve in terms of her political ambitions, at least in terms of this federal election. And so she perhaps needs to be aware of this full moon. She probably doesn't believe in this kind of stuff. But anyway, Sarah Wagenknecht is potentially impacted by this full moon. And I want to... Tucker Carlson. I don't know what Tucker Carlson is up to. I mean, he's, I suppose... always getting high profile, maybe helped by Trump's election victory. But Tucker Carlson has his ascendant at 2414 Cancer. So this full moon is exactly on Tucker Carlson's ascendant. So this may have an impact on how Tucker Carlson presents himself. It could have an impact on his various relationships. I don't know, it might have an impact on his private life perhaps, maybe something that we just never know about. But in terms of his public profile, we may see something going on with Tucker Carlson over the next couple of weeks, because it's pretty exact. Assuming we've got the right time, it's 10:07 a.m. in San Francisco. That seems a pretty exact time. So 2414, this full moon is exactly on his ascendant, and so maybe the next couple of weeks could be quite important for him. And I wanted to finish with the British royal family. Camilla was born on July the 17th, 1947, and Camilla has her... What am I looking at? Camilla's sun is at 2347 Cancer. So Camilla has a full moon exactly on her sun. I think that this could potentially be quite important and something she should be aware of. And what does the sun represent? Well, she's got Leo rising, so that's especially important. Her sun in Cancer. The sun, of course, represents the men in her life, and that includes her husband, King Charles III. So that full moon, and this full moon, it's not just the fact that it's on her sun. Look at her true black moon Lilith. She's got a sun true black moon Lilith opposition in her chart. And so with a full moon opposition her sun, I think, again, there may be cause for concern. I don't think this full moon is going to be particularly positive for Camilla. And it may be something she has a realization, or she sees something, she understands something. I suppose it could be events, but I think the next couple of weeks, maybe the next month, could be difficult for Camilla. And finally, I'm not going to end with a person. I'm going to end with an event. Harry and Meghan. Harry and Meghan, when they were married, the moon was at 2304 Cancer. So this full moon it affects their marriage potentially. The moon is opposition Pluto. It's always there. The power struggle, the intensity of their marriage, and then the full moon is right on it. I mean, okay, it's not exactly on it, but the moon is within it. The full moon is within a degree of a marriage moon, so that puts further pressure on their marriage. Again, are we going to see anything? I mean, they must be under huge pressure because I've noticed that YouTube, they've really loaded up the attack on Meghan, and a lot of talk about her was it her Netflix show? What's it? Love Megan, whatever. Love from Megan, whatever. Megan cooking. I wonder if I should mention that July the 15th. I think that's supposed to start on Wednesday the 15th. I mean, not that I care, but yeah, full moon does put Megan and Harry's marriage perhaps under more pressure. So that's it. That's it as far as the full moon is concerned. I hope you found this video of interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And yeah, thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.